Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dear fathers, dear colleagues, dear guests, in this brief historical discussion of transhumanism and its relation to modern philosophy, I will begin with two remarks that run in opposite directions from each other. On the one hand, there is the common perception that in the case of transhumanism, we found ourselves in front of a new term, a completely new one that is meant to label a type of approach specific to the last decades of human history. This novelty is attestable by the very fact that the term as such was proposed for the first time in the 20th century by Julian Huxley. However, as has been noted by Harrison and Voliniak in 2015, in spite of its futuristic connotation, transhumanism has a long history that dates back to Dante's Paradiso and ultimately to the Pauline epistles. In the first part of my paper, I would like to set the general framework of this discussion, to put the main thesis on the link between modern philosophy and transhumanism, because in my opinion, there is a strong link between the two figures of philosophy. My contribution is guided so by the following general statements. Transhumanism is a continuation of the process of modernity. It is like a separate or specific part of it, one that could be described as accelerated, intensive, and so on. I do not mean by this that it is a necessary consequence of it. I think we cannot make such claims about the logic of history, but that there are many important similarities between the ideas central to the definition of modernity and that of transhumanism. Someone epistemically cautious might say that we are more likely not to be wrong than to be wrong about this. Second, modernity is a historical cultural construction, an epoch, defined essentially by the will of the human being to place science, later technique and technology, at the center of individual and collective existence for its understanding and improvement. Third, modern philosophy is that historical figure cut out by itself in the history of philosophy that puts science at the center of the understanding reality and of itself. At the same time, the human being places itself at the center of the problem of knowledge, hence the epistemological character of modern philosophy, and sets itself as the ultimate goal of knowledge. It is no coincidence that all the fundamental question of philosophy stated by Immanuel Kant concern only the human being, and the unique question which encompasses all others is, what is man? Fourth, ideas that underlie the transhumanist conception, generally speaking, can be found in many modern philosophies. Of course, not all modern philosophers enunciate such ideas, and they are to be found with more or less relevance in different thinkers. The framework ideas that constitute the background of this presence and that derive from the fact that science is taken ab initio as the only model of cognitive achievement par excellence concern the fact that modern philosophy has the human being as the essential reality upon which it bears its own discourse, places the human being in the horizon of its perfectibility or improvement. In short, human being must not only be described, but must be formed, even produced. And for some thinkers, the consent of human being, individual or collective, is not even necessary, since it will thus be led away from ignorance, immaturity, infantilism to science. Third, sees this process as a collective one, as a benefit offered by humanity to everyone, and as a duty of everyone to humanity. Naturally, I do not have the time to argue in extenso for this interpretation, In my abstract, I hoped at least achieve this for two philosophers who often mark the beginning and the end of modern philosophy somehow, Descartes and Nietzsche, respectively. However, the time resulting from the schedule, which adequately tried to make possible the presentation of as many speakers as possible, does not allow me to do so, so I confine myself to only one, Descartes, of the two I had initially in mind. So the second part of my presentation is only about Descartes' significance in the transhumanist interpretative horizon. On countless occasions, Descartes was considered not only the father of modern philosophy, understood as an academic discipline, but admiringly or critically, also the initiator of a new paradigm of behavior, action, and self-transformation of man and society through the mathematical science of nature. He emerged, for example, as a leading exponent of what Richard Noble called the new religion of technology, typical of modernity from the 17th century to the present day, a religion which did nothing more than take the tutelary place in Europe of Christianity. But still, the apparently easy acceptance of Descartes into the proto-transhumanist club does not seem self-evident. There are prominent transhumanist authors who oppose this inclusion. Stefan Lorenz Zorner, for example, points out that, I quote from him, "It needs to be pointed out that the concept of reason which modern thinkers like Descartes and Kant employed does not correspond to that of transhumanists. Descartes and Kant hold that human beings have an otherworldly rational part and this worldly material one. Transhumanists affirm a scientific, says Zollner, affirm a scientific, naturalist, and this worldly understanding of human beings, and hence cannot affirm a modern understanding of otherworldly rationality, which used to be upheld by Descartes and Kant. This makes it clear that there is a clear gap between the Enlightenment and the transhumanist concepts of reason. In this perspective, the refusal to accept it within the framework of transhumanism seems to be umbilically linked to the phenomenon in the history of ideas, more general, but still a later one, of the Enlightenment. His presence of Descartes, of course, stands or falls together with the latter's acceptance as a form of, to say, proto-transhumanism. It seems fair to me to begin by evoking some important philosophical points of divergence between a Cartesian and a transhumanist position. Of course, there may be more of this than listed here, but this is worthy of discussion first. The mention will be followed by a short answer designed to indicate how I understand to overcome the objection in question. First of all, if the goals and basic views of transhumanism rely on naturalistic notion of humanity, which differs by degree, not by type, for other organisms, this is a quotation from Zorner, then the Cartesian ontological distinction between humans, in which we find res cogitans, or the soul, and all other organisms, only variations of res extensa, seems to draw a decisive barrier in this point. There are at least two types of responses here. On the one hand, the trialism proposed by John Cottingham instead of the canonical Cartesian dualism. In short, I quote from Cottingham, also composed of two substances, mind and body, the human being possesses distinctive attributes in its own right, including sensations, passions, emotions, and these form a third category that cannot be reduced to thought or extension. Therefore, the barrier between the human being and animals for Descartes is not as radical as it is usually thought. Not to mention that, for Cottingham, animals should not be reduced to mere mechanism either. Even if it is not an ontological continuity or an elaborated detailing, there are significant mediation, there are significant mediation between the human being and animals. On the other hand, I would like to appeal against this objection also to a hypothesis of my own, which I would call functional similarity. In a certain sense, this is a contrary approach to Cottingham's previous one. In short, it is extremely important to see that the mechanism of functioning for the two substances overlaps in a significant way in Descartes. Central here is the notion of efficient causality, whose epistemic success in explaining the laws of corporeal nature secures not only a privileged but also a practically ubiquitous position in the entire epistemic field, regardless of the nature of the targeted existence. Therefore, effective causality is transferred more or less tacitly or programmatically from res extensa to res cogitans in Descartes. See, for instance, the arguments of Descartes for the existence of God, and their specificity compared to Thomas Aquinas is precisely the role played by this kind of causality. We will therefore not be surprised to later see in Spinoza how, according to his famous formulation from Ethics, I quote from Spinoza, the order and chain of ideas is one and the same as the order and chain of things. In short, the mind and the bodily mechanism work alike in Descartes, and the mind is in its own way a mechanism. In Descartes, representations or ideas constitute precisely the object of mind, analogous to those we encounter in nature. In conclusion, these observations significantly mitigate these differences usually assumed to be decisive and self-evident in Cartesian metaphysics, the difference between man and animal, respectively between the two substances within man. This allows us to notice here precisely the applicability of the transhumanist project. I would like to draw attention further, and at the same time at the end of the discussion, to some Cartesian ideas with a certain transhumanist potential. Some I appreciate less vocally invoked previously by the interpreters. The first idea concerns the relationship between medicine and mechanics or physics. It should be emphasized here that in the case of Descartes, we can talk about a new type, new content for medicine, and a new, radically new meaning of medicine. Thus, René Mirkes sees in Descartes the father, or at least the visionary of transhumanist medicine, he being the one who in his discourse on method, I quote from Mirkes, envisioned a radically new kind of medicine, one that would make humans healthy and fulfilled ad infinitum, healthy bodies beyond aging and degeneration, and vigorous minds beyond their natural powers and competencies. The potential of current and future biotechnological interventions to alter what it means to be human might very well convert Descartes' dream into reality. I stop here. There are many other points, but I hope at least in the volume of proceedings will be the place to put it in extent. So thank you very much.